Hello and welcome to the Rabblecast. My name is Eric Hernandez, here along with
Doug.
and you are listening to episode number 624, I believe. Yes? No? You can check
That
me on
sounds
that
about right.
one. We've been talking about a lot of different news and different stories, especially when it pertains to different strikes. So much so that we wanted to go back to something that has been proven to be strike-proof, and that is the world of professional wrestling. We cover some current event topics later in the show, but we talk about mostly the recent purchase and changes of the WWE. Back in April, Endeavour Group bought out the WWE. Recently, there was some further change now. WWE and UFC are now under the umbrella of TKO, which is another offshoot of Endeavour. So it's all been packaged together. We talk about some of the history, some of the different happenings, and just wrestling in general and our thoughts about a bunch of different things. And we also get into some of the news with CM Punk that had transpired in recent weeks. Again, we don't get too far into it. It's just surface stuff, just conversation, just back and forth, having fun. Right?
Yeah.
There we go.
All right.
With that said, we are brought to you by InsidePulse.com. You can find us under the podcast section. You can also find the show over on YouTube, youtube.com/Rabblecast. Check us out on our main page, Rabblecast.libsyn.com, where the show is always uploaded. Subscribe, get the news feed, or excuse me, RSS feed. Send us a tweet at Rabblecast. Check out the Rabblecast Facebook fan page. And as always, email us, rabblecast@gmail.com. If you have any stories, if you have any pictures, any critiques or feedback, send them in. It's been a while since we've done a wrestling-centric podcast, so it's always fun to go back on that one. So if you have any thoughts or ideas, send those in as well. Anything else, sir?
No, I'm good.
All right. With that, let's get into it. Enjoy the show.
How are you?
I'm hanging in there. I had a stressful day, but then again,
Oh,
life is stressful.
I agree.
So
I agree.
that's why we do this. Get together, have some fun, talk about stuff, and try to let loose a little bit. So,
Yep.
how are you feeling, sir?
A hell of a lot better than I was last week. My cough has subsided thanks to a round of azithromycin and some methyl.
Methadone?
No, methadone. Jesus Christ. No, I'm trying. I was going to say isocyanates, but no, it's methyl prod, methylprednisolone, something like that. It's some type of a steroid that reduces inflammation.
Okay.
Yeah, so they gave me some of that. That worked on my So I started taking that the other day and started taking the edge off of everything. So I'm almost done with everything, and feeling much better. Actually sleeping through the night, which is pretty fucking sweet.
Nice.
So yeah, doing much better, feeling much better.
Very good, sir. Very good.
Yeah.
So, as we were talking about a bunch of different things from last week, a lot of the news regarding TV, movies, and all that stuff has been kind of sparse because of the strikes and everything. There really isn't much to talk about. There's very little news. So I figured let's switch gears a little bit this week. How does that sound?
Sure. What are we switching gears to?
Back to our old standby. The one thing that a writer strike or an actor strike really can't touch. Not even streaming at this point.
Professional wrestling?
Yes.
That's perfect. Okay. All right.
It runs all year round. Nothing really affects it. There's always a show, even when somebody falls from the rafters. They'll do whatever it takes to make sure that they satisfy the customers who buy the tickets.
Yeah.
So, with that said, I figured let's tackle a few different things because last week, I believe, last Monday Night Raw, not this, what's today? Today's the 21st, so we're going a week before, was supposedly the last Monday Night Raw of the McMahon era.
Really?
I don't know if you heard about that.
No, I've been very out of touch with WWE.
Okay. So we have to rewind the clock a little bit back to the day after WrestleMania, back in April, I believe it was,
Yes.
when it was announced that Endeavour Group, or Endeavour, had purchased the WWE.
Yes.
The same company also holds the UFC, the
Yes.
most popular mixed martial arts company. I was going to say stable company around. Because let's face it, no matter what, out of all the other MMA startups, your Bellators, your Elite, XC, whatever.
Sure dogs.
Exactly, yeah. Nothing has been able to measure up quite to the standards of the UFC, to which Dana White has been reigning supreme over there and still is continuing to reign supreme, even though some of the guard has changed ever since the buyout from Endeavor. So what was recently announced was the merger of both UFC and WWE under a single umbrella of, I believe they're calling it TKO, is the company that is made under this now?
Something like that. I remember the news when it popped up. I remember glancing through it, but that was already. You said that was back in April?
Well, April's when the Endeavor buyout happened.
Okay.
I remember because I was watching the press conference with Triple H after WrestleMania, and some of the different news outlets were trying to ask him about it. He goes, "We're not going to answer those questions tonight. We're just going to focus on what we just did. Tomorrow's another day for that question." That was Endeavor itself, but now it looks like they've rolled WWE and UFC. And when I say rolled, I don't mean like suddenly they're blended together and you're going to see Conor McGregor show up on WWE's next pay-per-view. Not at all. What that means now is Endeavor Group, which was, I believe, mostly like I think they were saying like marketing or something like that for like big shows, like fashion shows or other types of entertainment. When they went out and decided to buy UFC and WWE, they decided, okay, for anybody who wants to invest in this separate part of our company, we're going to make it its own thing. And that's where TKO comes from.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of like they're partitioning themselves a little bit. So anybody who might be a little leery, saying, "Oh, Endeavor Group used to do all these other shows and all these other entertainment avenues, but now suddenly they're getting into this. What is this? Physical ballet of the WWE, or this savagery of the UFC and cage fights? What the hell is this?" Well, for anybody who wants to invest, supposedly, now if you look up TKO on the stock market, you can actually buy shares of TKO and invest if you so please.
Okay.
What makes this interesting is that the change-ups that have happened a little bit as far as WWE is concerned right now, and that is Vince McMahon, even though he stepped down from the board sometime last year because of all the stories of him, doing settlements and paying for silence when it comes to certain sexual allegations. To this day, he still denies any wrongdoing. Even though they were trying to do further investigations, he's fully cooperated as far as I've heard so far, and said, "No, I'm going to step back a little bit, take some time off, figure some stuff out."
And grow a mustache.
That's right. When things started to settle down a little bit and the WWE was having trouble financially, they weren't doing so well. Streaming was still affecting them. The change-ups as far as TV is concerned are still, happening. Vince McMahon used his clout, apparently, to come back after the Endeavor purchase and put himself back on the board and put himself back in charge, essentially. So when everybody was saying that, "Oh, we're done with Vince McMahon, now it's going to be Triple H and Stephanie," because Stephanie had taken over, she was like co-head with somebody else. I can't remember the other gentleman's name, but
Nick Khan, I believe it is.
Was it? Okay, I wasn't sure where he sat on that board or that seating arrangement. But after a while, once Vince announced his return, Stephanie stepped down and went away, and I believe so did Nick Khan to a certain extent. He took a lesser role. But now Vince came back, and essentially when Vince McMahon came back, he put a for sale sign on the WWE, and that's what
Well,
attracted this whole situation of Endeavor and whatever, what have you. So it became a really interesting story going back and forth, because one of the things that people kept talking about as far as the WWE is concerned, and I know you and I have talked about this numerous times, was that Vince's idea of booking in certain cases felt out of touch.
yeah.
And he just had this old style or this old method of, building a babyface, having him be the face of the company, having somebody, challenge him, defeat him, then him chase after the belt, whatever the case is. WWE was very formulaic when it came to certain respects, with a few twists and turns in there, depending on the storyline and depending on the workers.
Mm-hmm.
When things were changing up, everybody was seeing what Triple H was doing, because Triple H was essentially in charge of the NXT booking, which started making some really great storylines and some really great superstars.
Oh, yeah.
But all those hopes of him taking over WWE booking and changing up things, maybe ushering in a new era of storytelling, looks like that kind of like got disrupted for a little bit until Vince, or I should say when Vince came back. But it looks like Triple H is still staying on in a creative capacity. Vince, I believe, is still in charge of things for the most part. I think they said he owns like 16.6% of the TKO company or branding, whatever that is. And I can't remember how much Nick Khan is pulling down. But essentially, like, there was a whole bunch of shake left and right. Like, a few months it was one thing, a few months later it was a different thing, and now suddenly this TKO announcement. Everybody's still assuming that when you hear UFC and WWE, you either think that they're going to be mashed together, like a small child playing with action figures, or there's always the debate of, well, a UFC fan is not necessarily a WWE fan. And let's face it, you don't have to be fans of both. They are two different things. And at one point, I remember back when the WWE Network was being talked about and was being touted, people kept making comparisons between WWE and UFC. And even WWE at the time was saying that, no, we are not competing with the UFC. In fact, they wouldn't even mention the UFC, even though their wrestlers would show up at certain live events, not in any company capacity, just because they were fans of the UFC. There was the one moment where Undertaker went to a Brock Lesnar bout, and after the bout, when Brock was walking out, Taker just looked over at him and, like, you want to do this kind of thing, like essentially alluding to the fact that Brock might be coming back to the WWE for a stint or for a few matches, whatever the case was. That was really it. There was no real cross promotion between them back then. And for whatever reason, nowadays people are saying that, well, if you're going to be owning both companies, you want to convert the fans from one to the other. I'm like, that's so short-sighted. Like, focus on your demographic. Focus on your fans. Don't try to change the fans of another group or another show just because you now have that in your portfolio. That just sounds kind of silly. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I mean, if you think about it, UFC in a certain regard is kind of what professional wrestling was 40, 50, 60 years ago. And what I mean by that is you can make the argument whether or not UFC is real or fake. And by real or fake, what I mean is, are the fights predetermined or not?
Okay.
And I've heard people go, and I've heard a million theories on this, and everybody has their own theory on this. Some people will swear up and down, no, all of the fights are 100% on the level. Some people will swear, like, no, like, a lot of the fights are on the level, but certain, like, big number of fights are going to be, they're going to want them to be, they're going to want to have one guy win one and the next guy win the other one. That way they can have, like, a big rubber match for the entire thing. But no matter how you slice it, it still has that air of legitimacy, which is what professional wrestling had before kayfabe died.
Okay.
So you don't even necessarily have to, have to know for a fact. What you have to know is, what you have to know is it's got that air of legitimacy to it. Make sense?
Yeah.
So to a certain degree, your fans will cross over, but I know plenty of people who watch MMA and UFC, but I also know I know UFC fans who despise pro wrestling, and I know wrestling fans who despise, MMA and thinks it's stupid. But it is what it is. But I mean, I think more the subject of the matter is that what you're really going to end up with in the entire situation is you're going to end up with combat sports are all basically the biggest combat sports in the United States are controlled by one company. So when you think of it in that regard, yeah, they're the juggernaut in terms of, and yeah, wrestling I still think of as a combat sport, to be perfectly honest with you. Yeah, we definitely know it's predetermined now and all that stuff, but it's a combat sport.
I mean, yeah, for as much as it is predetermined, like you said, it takes a certain level of athletic ability to pull off the different stunts and maneuvers that they pull off in that ring.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
For as much as, I mean, I've had firsthand experience being in the ring. You have to have what they refer to as a certain amount of endurance or a certain kind of gas tank to run the ropes, to do the drop downs, to do the hip toss, to do the clotheslines. You'll gas out or lose your breath real quick. So yes, you have to have a certain amount of athletic ability, and because of that, it is still a combat sport.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
But real quick, I just was looking up the list of the different names because I forgot where Nick Khan sat on the list of all the different titles at this point.
Yeah.
So we have Vince McMahon, who is executive chairman.
Okay.
Ari Emanuel is a CEO. He is the CEO and founder of Endeavour. Nick Khan sits as the president of the WWE currently.
Okay, got it.
And then they have a mix of different members from both WWE and Endeavour, I guess, just to make things a little even keel. Oh, look at that. Jonathan Kraft, president of the Kraft Group and the New England Patriots. He is a representative on the board. He is for Endeavour.
Huh.
Did not know that. And for anybody who's wondering, Triple H, although he is not part of the corporate staff, he is still part of senior management. And his title is still, he holds Chief Content Officer, Head of Creative, Executive Producer, and why they list Hall of Famer here is kind of silly.
Well, they're still ridiculous people at the end of the day.
Oh, check this shit out. Senior Vice President of Talent, Development Creative, Shawn Michaels.
Yes.
And they still have William Regal as Vice President of Global Talent Development.
Well, the big thing was, so here's what I can recall from the entire affair. So Vince McMahon stepped down, I think it was a little over a year ago. I want to say it was like July, August of 2022. He was gone. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, he came back. I think it was. So this is slowly coming back to me out of the time fog, so to speak. I know there was some weirdness going on where I think he basically kind of pulled some strings with some board members that he was close with, and he got himself voted back in even after he had left. And I think he basically came back just to broker this entire deal and basically get his piece of the entire affair. But there was that interesting stretch of time where the WWE was effectively being run by Triple H and Stephanie McMahon, I believe. But during that point in time, there was a lot of weird movements around the wrestling world because then all of a sudden, all the people who had been cut over the last 3 to 5 years, who were Triple H people, who were basically NXT people that Trips was high on, who eventually made it up to the main roster. Vince looked at, shrugged his shoulders, and says, I have no idea what to do with this guy who got released. All of a sudden, Trips is like, everybody's coming back. And one of the big ones at the time, William Regal, had left, gone to work for AEW. He had actually, at the time, he was the head of a stable. You've heard of the Blackpool Combat Club?
Yes.
Okay. Everybody listening, Blackpool Combat Club. It started with Bryan Danielson and Jon Moxley. And then they added some people along the way. So they ended up with Wheeler Yuta and Claudio Castagnoli and so on and so forth. But then when Vince McMahon left, who I believe was the one who gave William Regal his release, he went back there because Trips loves Sam. Trips loves Regal. Little known fact, they actually tagged together back in the early 1990s for a short stint.
Mm-hmm.
So back in those days, so he came back because he kind of liked the role he was doing, where he was doing like more talent scouting and stuff like that, and he was all for that. So he came back, and then things got a little bit spurious with the return of Vince. So I think they just it makes sense that they kind of found that weird, like, just go over here and work on this, because I know he was working there, and I know Shawn Michaels has been doing an awful lot of work in Development Center down in Florida, splitting his time between there and middle of nowhere Texas, where he's, you know, like a crazy farm guy now.
He looks it too.
Yeah, I was gonna say between Wrangler jeans, the rattlesnake boots, and the fucking plaid shirt and all that stuff. So, but anywho, getting back to the brass tacks of the matter. So yeah, it's been this weird back and forth with the entire thing, and yeah, no matter how you cut it with the entire thing, this has just been it's been a weird shakeup that's been going on and on with this stuff. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the back and forth was interesting because, especially with Vince, when he was getting in trouble for the different stories, like I said before, it looked like Vince was going to step away and just let Triple H and Stephanie take over, which everybody was assuming was going to happen eventually. Like when Vince finally gives it up, or finally passes away, that it was going to be left in their names. Well, for the fact that he actually sold the company, that was kind of interesting, but it looks like it came at a time, after the pandemic and streaming has become so prevalent nowadays. So TV is not as, I guess you can say, as profitable as it used to be. Because when they were shopping around their TV rights, especially when it became to their streaming rights, let's face it, the WWE Network is no longer around in its regular form. Now it more or less exists through Peacock, and it's not as robust as it used to be. Like, there was a point in time where you could look up old matches, old pay-per-views, hell, old eras of wrestling, because they were buying up the library left and right. Now, imagine. Now, I don't know if Peacock still has access to all of that, but they did get the streaming rights for all their stuff. I believe that WWE also gave them to NBC Universal, gave the TV rights. And I can't remember which one comes up first. One comes up, I believe it's NBC Universal and Fox. Both of those TV rights come up in 2024.
Okay.
And then the Peacock streaming rights come up in 2026. So that'll be renegotiation and everything else. And Endeavour, or at this point TKO, is going to want to try to negotiate and leverage more money, because at that point they can project further out. It's just interesting to see like how this is all playing out little by little. And I'm reading here real quick that with the return of Vince McMahon, let's see here. Let me just read it for you. So Nick Khan becomes the president of the WWE post-merger, not unlike Dana White's role as the president of the UFC. The deal additionally grants Vince McMahon life tenure as an executive chairman, the right to nominate 5 WWE representatives on the 11-member board, as well as veto rights over certain actions by the new company. In addition, McMahon will own 34% of the new company, with a 16% voting interest. Okay, that's where the 16 came from. Shane McMahon had attempted to purchase the UFC multiple times in the 2000s, but Vince had talked him out of doing so. Wow, I didn't know that.
Wait a minute, read that again, please.
Shane McMahon had attempted to purchase the UFC multiple times in the 2000s, but Vince McMahon had talked him out of doing so.
Oh, got it. Interesting. Huh.
So essentially, by stopping Shane from buying that, allowed this deal to come down later on, some 20 odd years later?
Yeah, it's interesting because back in the 90s, UFC was worth nothing. I think when Dana White bought the thing, he bought it for a couple $1 million because it was on his ass. Hell, there was quite a few states where it was illegal to run UFC events. And, I don't care for the guy. I think he's a scumbag. But Dana White, I'll give him this. Him and I think it's the Fertitta brothers.
Yes.
They built the thing up into that $1 billion juggernaut that they did over from 2004, 2005 up to, this merger. On a quick side note, I jumped on the Peacock and I went to the WWE section, and yeah, they still have ECW, WCW, World Class Championship Wrestling, AWA, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, Mid-South Wrestling, and Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
Oh,
Ooh,
okay.
Southpaw and Southpaw Regional Wrestling. Fucking sweet.
All right. All right, so I take that
Anyway.
back because I think that was a lot of the different libraries that they had bought up or that are still available.
Hmm.
Okay. By chance, do you remember how much Vince bought the company for back in the day from Vince McMahon Sr.?
Oh, Christ Almighty! I want to say $1 million.
I'm trying to find it myself real quick.
So it was a very weird deal. It was something like I want to say it was like $1 million, or it was something around there. It was installment payments, and the agreement was if he missed a single payment, he automatically lost it, and he lost any claim to the promotion.
I remember the installments, and yes, I remember the condition of if he lost one or missed one payment. Yes, that all rings a bell. The reason I ask is because the current valuation for the sale of the WWE to
Yeah,
Endeavor puts it at 9.1 billion.
that sounds about right.
That's wow. That's
Well,
ridiculous.
you think about what he did over the years. And one of the popular rumors is so the deal went down for the purchase of the promotion in 1983, and Vince McMahon Sr. died in 1984. And the hot rumor has been for years, or the legend has been that if Vince Sr. knew what his son was going to do with the promotion, then yeah, he would not have sold it to him
Oh yeah,
because he did his fair share to kill the territories. But with the entire thing, it's undeniable that Vince figured out how to build the entire fucking thing up. I mean, he made Hogan as big as he was. He took the gamble on WrestleMania and he made it the institution it was, to the point where, people say, wrestling, WWE is like Kleenex. For a lot of people who are not really into it, it's synonymous with wrestling, much like Kleenex is kind of synonymous with tissue.
yes.
Weird example, but it makes sense if you think about it.
No, it falls right into place with that. Um, but you're right. Like for him to build it up and put essentially his life into the business. Like there was no. At one point he was a referee. At one point he was an announcer. All the stuff he did backstage, all the different meetings, and all the crazy stuff that you hear about. Yeah, it looks like right here it says $1 million. He and somebody else, some other business partners, quickly like scrounged some money together to buy all those stuff. But yeah, for him to put all that effort into it, not to mention the fact what his father did previous to in the territory days, you're looking at about 70 years of a company
Hmm.
run by the McMahons.
Oh yeah,
That's insane.
oh yeah.
And all the stories that you hear now coming out, like whenever you watch Dark Side of the Ring, and they give you all the, like
Hmm.
the dirty deeds that were behind the scenes and everything else. If you watch the Macho Man and Miss Elizabeth story, or if you watch the Luna Vachon story, I think there was one on Chris Canyon at one point. Like all the stuff that happens behind the scenes. I mean, wrestling is just a crazy, carny world, essentially.
Always has been, man. Always has been.
Yeah, and then like to find out like all this was orchestrated by this family and all the things that they pulled off and were able to navigate. I mean, the Monday Night Wars and everything else, and the other up and comers that tried challenging them as far as like Ring of Honor and Impact Wrestling. Um, I don't even know if I can honestly mention Global Force Wrestling because that really didn't amount to much. But
I don't think Global Force even exists anymore, honestly, especially since Jeff Jarrett's working for AEW.
I think it exists in some shape or form. It's just
I think I thought you were going to say it exists in Jeff Jarrett's mind.
yes, it does. It exists in a little toy ring under his bed with all his little rubberized figures. And that's how it exists. Um, no, it's just weird to look at the world of professional wrestling to see all these guys that have come and gone, all the storylines. Like I tried watching the Rock recently made a return on SmackDown apparently, and it made a lot of headline news only because like I believe the story that I was reading they were saying the Rock's return is a shining moment for the WWE, but it's overshadowed or has a downside to it because of all the different talent that were recently released Because let's face it, what happens when a new company takes over? What do? They make cuts. They get rid of non-essential people behind the scenes, in front of the camera. In this case, certain wrestlers. The Rock's daughter apparently was cut.
Oh shit! Really?
Yeah. So if that's the case, I don't doubt she's going to land somewhere else, or I don't doubt she's going to probably go somewhere else to train. And if this is indeed what she wants to do, she'll get some more training, she'll get more experience, probably come back, if not with the WWE NXT, maybe she'll end up somewhere else, AEW or other companies, and continue working her ass off. If The Rock's going to give her any kind of like support or advice, I'm sure that's going to be part of it. So,
unless she's completely stinky doo-doo in the ring.
Exactly. And I've never seen her work. I've seen some of the like ringside antics that she's involved in, and it's all right. Nothing crazy, nothing to write home about, but I've never actually watched one of her matches to judge one way or the other. But it's funny watching The Rock's return on SmackDown recently, because I'm like, all right, let me check it out, see what's going on. The one guy, Pat McAfee, who apparently has been making a lot of appearances for WWE recently. He has his own show, the Pat McAfee Show, where he talks sports and everything else. Austin Theory and him were jaw-jacking in the ring, going back and forth, blah, 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 blah. Ends up with The Rock coming down to interrupt and save McAfee in this debate. And I looked over at Jen at one point, and I was like, I didn't realize just how much wrestling is wasting time. Like, they're playing his music, Rock takes his time, comes down to the ring, flexes a little bit, poses a little bit, whatever the case is, and then runs through like a rigmarole of usual back and forth with Austin Theory, to the point where he just riles up the crowd, has them call Austin an a-hole, and then they break into like a quick skirmish and spinebuster onto Austin Theory to set up for the People's Elbow. And then he gives off to Pat McAfee and says, I want you to do the People's Elbow. And McAfee does the worst interpretation of a People's Elbow ever. But for the fans, if you're in the audience, I was like, wow, shit still works. I was surprised.
And also, that's one for, it's indicative also of the fact that they're still having a hard time. And I've talked about this before, and I still stand by my theory on this one. You know, a light shined on a duck's ass twice back in the 1990s into the early 2000s. Vince got not one but two crossover stars in a very short period of time. First, he had Steve Austin, where, I mean, Jesus Christ, in 1998, you could throw a stone and hit an Austin 316 shirt. They were everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, with how big the guy was. And then all of a sudden, 2 years later, the same thing went down with The Rock. All of a sudden, he was the biggest guy out there, and it was also perfect because, you know, he really got a chance to pick up the slack and do it when Austin was out with his, I think, second or third neck surgery. And then fast forward a couple of years, Austin's body finally gives out, and he was all tired and pissed off at some of the shit they were pulling, so he walked away from the wrestling business, and he was done. And also at that point in time, Rock said, I've had my fill of this, I'm going to get out of here, and I'm going to go to Hollywood, and, you know, good for him, you know, he now makes $15 million a movie or whatever the hell it is. So, but then Vince McMahon's like, no, I have to have, you know, a transcendent star to carry the company. It's not enough that they're just a big name. They have to be, you know, they have to be all over the media, and they have to be here, and they have to be there, and they have to be the brand. And that's what they did with Cena by hook or by crook. And, you know, he's still a very polarizing guy, and he hasn't been an active wrestler in a couple of years now. But it's even to the same point with the rest of it where, you know, he's been trying to do that with Roman Reigns for a while now, and it's worked to a certain degree. But also on the same, you know, you don't even know exactly what's going to happen next. And also, I think the point of it might be over anyway. So, you know, it's tough to tell at this point. And also, WWE's product is really not for people like me at this point.
No, that was one thing I noticed myself when I've been watching recent videos, because I really have not watched a regular WWE show in, oh God, I don't know how many years at this point. I'll catch a certain pay-per-view here and there. I'll watch a match online if it's available. The last big show that I really watched was this year's WrestleMania. Only because I was curious about some of the matches, and the Dominic and Rey Mysterio match caught my attention, and Rhea Ripley versus Charlotte Flair. Those are matches I'm like, oh, these sound like they should be good. Like, these are matches that I've been waiting for, dying for, kind of thing. But they were not even a possibility when I was watching regularly. But watching the whole Pat McAfee, Austin Theory, and The Rock segment, I'm like, all right, the nostalgia's there. That still works. But the rest of it, I'm like, wow, I am not interested in these guys whatsoever. And it just gone to show me, like, I was a diehard fan for the longest time. Like, I could tell you the storylines. I can tell you who's pissed off at who and backstage what was going on. And because I was so enamored and so enthralled with everything that was going on. Hell, this show itself used to be a weekly wrestling podcast where we would just cover all the different news and events that were going on. And I was digging so deep for all the information that it took over a lot for a while. But then after a bit, I'm like, you know what? With all the other shows that are coming out and the fact that you have other wrestlers doing their own podcasts, it makes little to no sense to keep doing that type of show, because they're already giving you the dirt directly. Like, I'm trying to search and dig for it. Now I'm just going to be like an aggregate of different wrestling news. So like, that's go to InsidePulse.com. You can find all the information there, because they still do wrestling coverage and everything else. Last I checked. So it made more sense to do that and just talk whatever we want to talk about on here. But the current WWE product is just so weird to me now.
It has passed us by.
Yeah, it really has. And I don't know how I feel about that. Other than to admit that I've gotten old. Because the last time I really, really watched a regular WWE show was somewhere in, like, I want to say like my early to mid 30s. And at the time, I guess I was still in their demographic, what they were shooting for. Now I'm on the outskirts, and I really don't get pulled in as much. I don't go for it as easily. I've watched a few AEW matches here and there, and their stuff I get more into. The booking is a little bit different, obviously, but even that, I'm just like, okay. Some of the new guys I'm not really familiar with. Some of the other guys I've seen in other companies or other feuds, and as different characters. You'll have your veterans like Jericho or Sting that'll show up, and then some other people from WWE as they get released, whatever the case is. But I was like, all right, it's overall just not as it doesn't capture my imagination as easily. Although I still love watching Botchamanias, so I guess I'm still hooked in some respect.
At this point, yeah, I have a little bit more attention for AEW, mainly because there's a lot of people there I'm just more familiar with at this point, like your Eddie Kingstons or your Orange Cassidy or some of the guys from the Dark Order, although that's kind of, I think that entire thing has kind of run its course. And a lot of it has to do with a lot of those guys got drawn from the ashes of Chikara. So that was a promotion that I had gone to watch a bunch of times, in years past before they went under, because the guy who ran it's a scumbag. But be that as it may, I've always found a lot of the wrestling there. I don't want to say it's more of a wrestling fan's wrestling as opposed to a sports entertainment kind of thing through the WWF or WWE. Good God, I can't believe I'm still fucking doing that 21 years after the fucking fact.
Get the F out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, good God, that was the spring of 2002. But the entire thing with it is, number one of the big things is, I enjoy the fact that a lot of the times, if it's a match in a lot of those matches, you're going to see someone bleed. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a stupid thing, but I'm all for blood in wrestling.
No, I mean, you're right, because for a while, especially once they did the switch over from the Attitude Era to the PG Era, which was you can thank the McMahon family and their attempt to try to run for political office through Linda McMahon, where they're like, oh, we can't leave this open as an attack vector. We want to make sure that we give her all the opportunity to be able to run and not have her opponents harp at the WWE at their lack of class, essentially. And it became where you would watch mainstream WWE matches, and they would have certain restrictions on them, certain moves you couldn't use, no blading, no blood, no color, whatever the case was, unless it was approved by the front office or certain things. Weapons were reduced, the raunchiness was reduced. It made sense because they were going for a certain product. But I would say, Chikara, as you were referring before, just like most other indie shows, was just that. Indie wrestling, they were allowed to go all out. Those guys were able to put it on the line because they would wrestle like what, maybe once a month or once every couple of weeks.
Chikara at its high point, Chikara was running almost weekly.
Was it?
Yeah, it was only a short stretch when they were at that real high point.
Okay.
But yeah, for the most part, yeah, they were running. But yeah, that was a relatively short period of time. But I'd say consistently they'd usually run one weekend a year, and it was usually like a triple shot. So it would be like a Friday night show, a Saturday show, and then like a Sunday show, and that was it. And then they'd run again in a couple of weeks. So
yeah, but what I'm trying to say is that WWE's schedule was so harsh. Like, life on the road. You were traveling. You were wrestling 5 days out of the week, 2 days off. One of those days was usually a travel day. One day, maybe, if you're lucky, you'd get to relax and, just heal up a little bit, whatever the case was from what your schedule was going on. As opposed to all these indie wrestlers who would wrestle like tours or stints, so they'd have like a busy month and then maybe take a few weeks off. Or they go overseas and do a tour, wrestle for a few months, and then take another month or two off and then go somewhere else. They would have those moments when they were hot. Like I remember when the Hardy Boys, when they were released either together or independently, they would go and do all these little matches, and then they would be red hot for a minute, and then they'd take some time off and relax and count their money. Or AJ Styles, same thing. When he left TNA, he had some time to do whatever the hell he wanted. Then eventually he ended up in WWE. At that point,
he just basically went and he did a tour. He just went and toured Japan heavily for I think about 2 years or so.
Yeah, and you can make a lot of money, have some great matches, some great experiences that way. And it benefited him greatly. I mean, he was already a fantastic performer, so it's not like he really needed to. He just wanted to do that. And it just improved his, his experience all the more. And when it came time for WWE, then it became a little bit easier. Then your move set is kind of reduced a little bit. You don't have to go as crazy unless it's a big match, like maybe a main event on Raw or a pay-per-view match. You can tone it down a little bit and not have to worry about as much, because as you get older, more injury prone, longer time to heal, it makes more sense to take it easy. But again, we've talked about life on the road for the WWE. It's kind of crazy. That's why a lot of guys who left the WWE and had the opportunity to go over to TNA or Impact Wrestling, whatever it was at the time, had that reduced schedule. Because you do, like what, 1 week on, 1 week off as far as the tapings are concerned?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
It was the weird setup because they were down in Universal Studios in Florida. So you didn't travel much because it was all in the same arena or same venue. You had the audience that was pretty much brought in from all the people who were at the park. But you could do multiple shows in a week or a day, and then you'd have some time off. So you didn't have to worry too much about if you got injured or anything else. The only time that would suck is if somebody would get like into legal trouble on an off show or off week. So you would have them on for 2 weeks, and all of a sudden they're like, oh, such and such was pulled over for a DUI. Now they're going to take them off the show for if they go into rehab or if they get delayed, whatever the case was. Weird things like that happened every now and then. And that was more up to the bookers to make sure that things were all straight and cohesive. But that's a different story entirely. But the difference between, like you were saying, the difference between what I refer to as indie wrestling, because that's anything that's not WWE. To a certain extent, I still see AEW as indie wrestling, but just a larger platform of it. Yeah, because it's a lot of the guys that you mentioned came from like some of the lower shows, and I don't mean lower in like any like quality from what they were doing. It's just they weren't the WWE. Like everybody eventually hopes to get to the WWE because they're hoping to make it big and get the big paycheck or exposure. But for the most part, if you're on some of the other shows like Ring of Honor, Impact, I always refer to those as more like indie in a sense, because the way they wrestled, they went out and did more. The acrobatics more, the physicality was more. I remember watching Abyss on Impact Wrestling, thinking to myself, this guy takes a lot of fucking punishment for no reason whatsoever. Yeah, you're big. Yeah, you're the monster, but Jesus Christ, tone it down a little bit. But they were willing to do that, and that's because, again, their travel schedule wasn't as intensive. They were going out trying to make a name for themselves, and it was a different story altogether. AEW, I mean, they pulled together a lot of indie names, a lot of indie darlings, Japanese wrestlers especially. Like, they brought all these different styles and names together. Yes, they finally made it big. Don't get me wrong. After they did, what was the first pay-per-view? All Out or All In?
Well, the testing was All In. That was actually before AEW technically existed. That was a little over 5 years ago.
Yep.
And that was basically because I think Dave Meltzer actually said they couldn't sell out an arena, so they said fuck it, and they booked, I think it was the Allstate Arena in Chicago, which is I think a 10,000 seater.
Yes.
And so they put that one together, and I think they sold it out in like a day or two.
Yeah.
And that one was basically, and that was effectively an indie show that just had some Mexican talent, Japanese talent, and Chris Jericho on it. But I mean, at that point in time, a lot of those guys were like Ring of Honor. We're splitting their time between Ring of Honor and Japan.
And that's why, for me, I still refer to it as an indie show in my head.
Okay.
Along those lines.
Just because you're saying it as independent from the WWE, then.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, now I follow you. Okay, at first I was like, I don't quite understand your definitions, but okay, now I'm with you, pal.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, because the WWE is always like the the grandest stage of them all, and all that other BS that they like to tout. That's fine. They've been there longer. They've been doing it, at a certain level for a while. But for AEW, who's still, let's face it, still a fledgling company, for as big as they are, they just have a bigger bankroll, so they can do whatever the hell they want, essentially. And they've had some missteps here and there. They've had some troubles.
Oh, yeah.
Especially recently, the news of CM Punk, once again, left WWE, wasn't sure where he was going, tried an MMA career. That didn't really work out for him. Eventually came back. People thought he was going to go back to WWE because he was on one of their shows as a commentator. That didn't work out, and then he ends up over in AEW, and everybody was all excited until it was, what was it? I want to say Jungle Boy, but what was his name? Something Perry?
Luke Perry. Or Jack Perry.
Jack Perry. Luke was his father.
Luke Perry's son, yeah.
Yes. Thank you. The stuff that happened overseas in London, one of their anniversary shows, the big shows, where there was a skirmish between the two of them. Cooler heads could have prevailed, but unfortunately things didn't turn out that way, and there was a lot of nonsense, and it ended up with a shouting match between CM Punk and Nick Khan, apparently, and CM Punk is gone. But
there was a bunch of other stuff involved in the entire equation as well, but that's a decent chunk of it.
Yeah, no, don't get me wrong. We could sit here and go through the whole thing. It's just the more stories came out, the more it became convoluted and everything else. It's just from the gist of what I heard, and this is without getting into it fully. They already had the two, Jake Perry and CM Punk already had some animosity between the two of them. Mm-hmm. There was some kind of a disagreement backstage, and what could have been a good moment for CM Punk to show that he's a locker room leader, to handle it a certain way,
mm-hmm. didn't
happen that way. He just let the irritation get to him, and Perry could have been cooler about it as well, but I guess they didn't like each other that well, and they just got into it. And management had no other real choice to say that, hey, look, this isn't a problem. We've already had problems with you in the past. We have no other choice right now, and rather than deal with this BS further, we're just going to cut ties. So, I don't...
Yeah, and there's a lot... There's some... Well, the problem is I've heard multiple iterations of what happens, so at this point it's like, yeah, I'm not even sure what's going on, except the recurring theme seems to be that I think CM Punk might be like one of the most paranoid people on the planet.
That could be true, yes. He's had, he's had his moments in the world of professional wrestling and would have reason to a certain extent to be paranoid, I would say that much. Because usually he finds himself in weird situations that some of them are his own doing, others... whatever the case is, he just butts heads with people in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting theory that's happening right now is the question of whether CM Punk will return to the WWE now that it's under new management?
If they were smart and kept the whole thing quiet, and I've heard a few people come up with this theory as well, how big would the reaction be if he came out at like number 30 at the Royal Rumble?
Oh, I'd die. That'd be amazing.
That would be pretty wild. Will that happen? Who the hell knows? Then you're going to really find out, because a lot of people say if you're a professional, you never close the door on anything as long as there's an opportunity to make some money.
Yeah.
But if you're also a dumbass, then you also close that door, because you're more interested in behaving like a stupid child rather than, like, I'll give you like one of the best examples is this most recent dust up between. Really, it really kind of came down to CM Punk butting heads with the Elite and specifically the Young Bucks. I appreciate, a friend of mine put it best. He was like, both sides are wrong and both sides are jerk offs, but but the Young Bucks are even more fucking goddamn insufferable than Punk. But if all of these assholes actually could grow up and get their shit together, if they could actually put on a CM Punk and FTR versus Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks match, that would sell a lot of tickets. But one of the last things I heard, and this was probably, I think, like within a week before Punk got released or fired, whatever you want to call it. One of the rumors going around was he actually tried to put together a sit down with like the Elite and basically tried to just be like, let's try to talk this out, and they just blew him off.
Really?
But, that was one of the last things I heard was like CM Punk reached out to them. He was like, this is fucking stupid. Let's fucking just put this behind us. But, I don't want to go into too much detail, but I've heard a lot of shitty things about the Young Bucks. And I've also heard a lot of shitty things about CM Punk. So, but I've also heard a couple of good things about CM Punk. I haven't really heard a lot of good things about the Young Bucks.
See, this takes me back to certain locker rooms that I was in. And I didn't work for too many companies when I was on the independents, but some of the locker rooms that I was in, it hit me at one point that the wrestling world is full of a bunch of divas. And I say that in so much as... What's up?
Did you say demons or deviants?
Divas.
Oh, divas. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sense. It's okay. Actually, all three terms are applicable, I believe.
Yes, they're deviant diva demons.
Yes. They go all 3D.
I just, that's not bad. Dudley Boys. What you call it? I say that because, and I'm not trying to put anybody down when I say this, it's just that everybody was worried about their spot, what they look like, how they looked in front of the fans as far as in the ring, and making sure that their spot or their shine was there. Whenever I ran across people that had those mindsets or points in their head that they wanted to stick out, I was like, I don't know how this is going to work. Went fine for the most part. There were certain things here and there. I usually kept my mouth shut because it's the locker room. You're eventually going to work with one of these guys. You don't want to have any bad blood. But I would notice that just became a reoccurring theme where the male wrestlers were more divas than the ladies were. I noticed that the lady wrestlers were usually banded closer together. And for the most part, from what I saw in my experience, because we shared some of the locker rooms with some of the ladies every now and then, the ladies would actually pull off better communication as far as the locker room and the matches were concerned, that they didn't really worry about it too much. They knew that they were going to be able to work together on other shows in other towns, and they'd be fine with it. But the guys, I have to be able to do this, or I can't look bad in front of this crowd, or whatever the case was. I was like, what? Really? Like, that's... Guys, this is all pretend. Like, I just never understood that mentality of it, but that also goes to show you that I never really went that far. So, again... Whenever I speak about the locker room or my experience in the world of wrestling, I did not have like a huge career. I was not a big name. I was just a guy who wanted to work in the ring. I got together with a bunch of guys, made some friends along the way, met some, famous people along the way, and just had fun. That was me. I got irritated from time to time. I got I know I probably said a few things here and there that probably cost me a few opportunities here and there. Other than that, I just had fun. I said, fuck it. After a while, I said, I'm going to go to a certain age. I'm going to try to get certain accolades. If I can do that by this time, great. If I can't, I'm out. And that's ultimately what it became. So,
All right.
but hearing about, the whole CM Punk and the Young Bucks and the Elite, it's unfortunate. But I could see when I read those stories, when I read those rumors, and you have to take everything with a grain of salt, unless it's coming from somebody that's a reliable source. A lot of the stories, a lot of the reports, some of them are exaggerated, some of them are blown out of proportion. But if it's true that Punk was trying to settle everything and they were like, fuck you, then that's unfortunate. But I would like to see CM Punk make another in-ring return, because everybody wrote him off last time. They're saying, oh, he's done, he's never coming back again. No, once the wrestling bug bites you, it's entirely possible that you're going to come back and say, let's go for another round. Let's see what we can do. And I could see now, with the big change in WWE, that being a possibility.
Yeah. That's the way I'm thinking about it as well. And also, it's a simple fact. It goes back to what I previously said. If you're willing to behave professionally, and you look at the lay of the land, it's a business. And if you think about it properly, and you try to figure out how to make the most money, and if you run it that way, then everything else will sort itself out. And that being said, I mean, who the hell knows at this point? I mean, we'll see which way it all goes, I guess.
Two really good examples that I'll bring up as far as what you're saying there.
Yeah.
Edge and Matt Hardy.
Yes.
They had some turmoil, behind the scenes. The whole thing with Lita and Matt, and then Edge and Matt, whatever, or Edge and Lita. Yeah, there was a lot of bad feelings behind the scenes, but they were able to put their feelings aside and say, hey, look, we can make this into a storyline, and we could both pull off some matches and work professionally. And any animosity we have, we can kind of let it out in the ring to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm.
They made that work, so that worked for them in that respect. And then the big one that I'm always going to refer to is, in this type of situation, is Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff was destroying the WWE and Vince McMahon in the Monday Night Wars at one point. That all fell apart eventually, for anybody who followed the Monday Night Wars, to the point where eventually Bischoff was offered a chance to come work for the WWE, and he said yes. He showed up. He was the general manager for a while.
Yep.
Something you never thought you'd see is Eric Bischoff on WWE television. But
nope.
He went there, he made some money, he got his name out there again, he ended up writing a book, and then after that, you just, screw it. And then he still criticizes them from wherever desk he sits at nowadays. So
he does a podcast, and he makes up some breathtaking lies.
Oh, really?
Yeah, a friend of mine has listened to it before, and he's even just out of nowhere, I'll get a text and be like, I just listened to this episode of the Eric Bischoff podcast, 83 Weeks. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, holy fuck, this man is either delusional or lying through his teeth. And he doesn't seem delusional.
Not that I've listened to any of the Bischoff show, but I recently listened to the Joe Rogan episode with the Hulk Hogan.
Oh, speaking of lies.
Exactly. I had to sit there and just not turn it off, because at multiple points during the show, I was like, oh, this guy's just fucking bullshit, man. Like, all the nonsense he talks about. There's been other guys on the show, Jake the Snake, The Undertaker, most recently Kurt Angle was on the show, and all these guys are being honest and open. They're not spilling all the information, but they're talking about some of their experiences in the business. And when it comes to Hogan, man, he just fucking makes himself out to be the victim in certain cases. Oh, he was such a hard worker and this and that. I don't deny the fact that Hogan was a big part of wrestling history, but the man never knew when to walk away. The man never knew when to properly pass the torch. And he just never could get out of his own way. It's so sad and so upsetting to hear him talk about some of the old days, especially with Andre the Giant and other shit. just because you're getting his perspective, and when I say you're getting his perspective, you're getting his version, which is usually full of lies and just or just bad memories, whatever you want to call it. But it's
Yeah.
not the way he was talking about it at all whatsoever. And it's just he wants to build himself up even in his retirement, I guess you can say. But it's aggravating to know that he's still making so much money out there these days just off of his name alone.
Well, I mean, with how big he was, it makes sense that he would do that because he still needs the money because between the alimony and between having two dumb children who do stupid fucking things and all the other problems he's had, I mean, the guy should not hurt for money at all. I mean, God, if nothing else, I believe when he got signed to WCW, and I think that was 1994, I believe he was getting like $4 or $5 million a year right at that point.
No shit,
So,
really.
yeah, I want to say that. So, I mean, if you extrapolate that out till, I think the contract ran out in like 2001 or so. So if you figure, even if you kind of take it on the conservative side and go like $3 or $4 million a year for that entire stretch, that's 7 years. You figure he probably just off the WCW run, 7 years at $4 million. That's $28 million if I'm doing the math correctly.
That's insane.
So, and it is pretty fucking ridiculous. And I mean, even on top of that, keep in mind, he also had one of those sweetheart contracts with WCW where the deal was actually made with Turner itself instead of WCW. So when they folded, he literally said, he was like, well, Turner still exists, so I'm still getting paid. I'm going to go sit at home. Send me my check.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of guys who did that. But but my favorite thing about it is there's two fellows out there. They do a podcast. It's called Final Wrestling Place, and they did an episode a few weeks ago where, in honor of the Joe Rogan episode with Hogan, they actually sat down and they compiled the top 10 lies of Hulk Hogan.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, and it is pretty friggin' hilarious. My two favorites are how both Metallica and the Rolling Stones asked him to play bass for them, but he had to turn them down.
Yeah, that one always gets me.
That and I think my personal favorite is at WrestleMania 3, Andre the Giant weighed approximately 800 pounds when Hogan body slammed him, and it was the first person in history to body slam him, even though we have video evidence of people body slamming Andre years before that.
Yep.
He tore every muscle in his back, and Andre died the next day.
The next day?
The next day.
This is
Hogan's somewhere in between insane and a liar. So
this is what makes me wonder, like, out of all the physical punishment he took and all the nonsense he went through, like, how much of this is now affecting his ability to recall these memories? That might be part of it. So maybe we're making fun of somebody who's mentally ill. I don't know. For anybody who's a fan of Hulk Hogan to this day, I'm not saying you can't. Again, I'm not going to yuck somebody else's yum, but it's kind of hard not to acknowledge some of the discrepancies in his stories over the years. Again, the Metallica one, I remember we reported on that when it was mentioned at one point on news boards that, Hulk Hogan had a chance to be on Metallica at one point, but he turned them down. Bullshit.
Yeah, no.
On Rogan's show, he talks about being in a band at one point, and they did find like photos of him being like on stage or whatever the case was. I don't doubt he had some kind of musical abilities, but not to the extent that you could have been in Metallica. That just sounds so fucking far-fetched.
Yeah, that one's very spurious. But yes, I will. And you know what? Actually, though, I will make fun of Hogan for multiple reasons, including not one of which is, we've all heard the story about how he ratted out Jesse Ventura's efforts to unionize the wrestlers for his own gain. So just on that alone, fuck him. Or the fact that him doing coke and dropping the N-bomb, that too.
Again, look. Behind the scenes, we get to find out what some of these guys are really like, and Hogan has shown us time and time again what he does, and somehow he's still forgiven by his fan base, and he's still out there doing his thing. So, Postomania or whatever other fucking venture he's on nowadays. He's still making money, and I'll even like call BS on that one, because the amount of money he says he gets from some of the deals he makes, he would not be so hard up for cash if he was still making a bunch of these deals. Granted, a lot of these guys are now getting into the cannabis game, where they'll have their own brands, and maybe that's bringing in some cash. I know Ric Flair's got something going on, Hogan's got something going on, and a bunch of other wrestlers are getting into it. I think RVD is also getting into it. That one's a natural one. Let's face it. But
oh yeah,
the one story I heard recently, because again, Kurt Angle was on Rogan's podcast, and this one breaks my heart, because if you're saying Hogan made how much a year? $4 million?
I'm going to say $4 million, and I don't even know what he was making. That was just his WCW contract.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So the reason I say that annoys me is because before Ric Flair went to WCW, he was with another promotion, and he was getting somewhere in the neighborhood of $400,000 to $600,000 a year for his contract. When he came to WCW, the company he was with, I can't remember if it was Deep South or one of the other territories or companies. Essentially, when they bought out that company, when WCW bought out that company, they bought his contract along with it.
Yeah.
And from what I was hearing from Kurt Angle's words, was that they never gave him a pay raise in his time in WCW.
Really?
So let's split the difference. Let's say Rick was making $500,000 a year. If Hogan was making $4 million and Ric Flair was making much less than that, that's a fucking shame.
Yeah.
Like Ric Flair at one point for WCW, he was like one of the main guys, one of the faces of the company. One of the few guys I knew who would give a fucking sports jacket and an elbow drop in the middle of the ring. He went out there and did everything. And apparently Ted Turner was a big fan of Ric Flair's as well, to the point where he noticed that he wasn't on the program for a while and was questioning what was happening. And then when somebody told him, oh, management told him to stay home because they don't have anything for him, Turner's like, fuck that. Call him up, make a storyline, get him in front of the cameras. We want him back out there more. But they never gave him a raise. If that's true, that's heartbreaking, especially after hearing what Hogan was purported to make back then. Because I know, like, the whole NWO storyline and everything else, that group was just fucking siphoning money off left and right from Turner's checkbook. But that's a damn shame.
Well, that was at that point in time when Ted Turner was just so adamant that he was going to beat Vince McMahon at his own game that he loosened the purse strings. And I apologize. I think it was $2.5 million a year in WCW, which is still a pretty impressive amount of money, because that's more than double what anybody else was making.
And not to mention the fact that he did very little.
He was wrestling. Yeah, he sure as hell wasn't on the road, 5 days a week. He was on the road, maybe once or twice a month. And when he was out running around doing all of that crap, he was, most of the time he was out there cutting a promo, and he was working, once or twice a month in pay-per-views. So.
Wow. Yeah, I remember a few times he would just show up, he would just jaw jack. And I know they say less is more.
Yeah.
But Hogan made an art out of that.
Oh, hell yeah.
So, whatever. And you can look up the information on Hulk Hogan and his time in WCW, especially after Vince Russo and all the other nonsense and creative control clauses and craziness. In fact, I'll even go as far as saying this. When TNA was vying for the second position behind WWE, and I was a big TNA supporter. I wanted TNA to make it, to get there, I wasn't even going to say surpass WWE. I just wanted them to be a contender and be on that same level with them. When it was announced that Hulk Hogan was coming to TNA, I'm like, fuck. Because you knew what was going to happen. He was going to bring all his buddies into the show. He was going to bring his ideas, make his changes. And it was shortly after Hogan arrived in TNA that they got rid of the six-sided ring. Like, one of the things that was like a mainstay for TNA and was differentiating them from WWE, they got rid of it because they're like, I'm confused by the six-sided ring. Why don't you just have a four-sided ring?
Yeah, which meanwhile it was one of the things that made them stick out as something different, and it added different dimensions to the entire thing.
Yeah, I mean the X division made great use out of those rings, but
Yeah.
because certain some of the old guard couldn't adapt to it or couldn't work with it, or some guys even complained that the ropes were too tight because they were much shorter in length on each side. I get
Yeah.
it. It's not for everybody, but it was something that was out there and it was fun to see and watch. I just wish TNA would have stood their ground a little bit more rather than paying out to Hogan and then saying, "Oh yeah, we'll make whatever changes you think should be made." You've been around long enough, obviously. But yes, I'll take Jeff Jarrett's King of the Mountain matches over Hogan being in the company.
Huh.
Actually, scratch that. I'll just give it to them both.
I was gonna say I was never a big Jeff Jarrett fan. I know some people who love the guy. I just never gave a shit about him. But Hogan, it was just. I remember when they said Hogan's coming into TNA. Oh, and Eric Bischoff's coming too. I was like, well, that was cool. I'm moving on.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just certain talent that arrives, and I use those words lightly. When certain talent arrives into a company, you're just like, all right, we've kind of seen this before. We know how it's going to happen, what's going to go down, and unfortunately, Hogan and Bischoff were no different. Look, they had their time in WCW. They made their mark in wrestling history over there with the NWO and everything else that was going on. And they just didn't know how to end it.
Mm-hmm.
Where it just, dwindled and then finally spiraled out of control that eventually just died out along with the rest of WCW. But there could have been so many great ways to go about it. Hell, if Hulk Hogan really wanted to, less is more and do that route, he could have had this big match. He could have had a send-off, lose. The NWO could have, quote-unquote, crumbled. Be off of TV for like 6 months to a year, collect that fat paycheck, and then come back with a bigger, stronger, stable or storyline, and try to do a re-emergence of NWO and WCW. But they just never knew how to, again, pass it off. They always wanted to be in the main spot. They always wanted to be the champions. They always wanted to be on TV. Look no further than the finger poke of doom between Hogan and Nash.
Yeah.
So, I know we're rehashing old WCW history at this point, but you have to look at the history of the world of professional wrestling, because more often than not, they just end up reusing old storylines and with different performers. So,
hey, if you copy an A, get an A, or copy a D, get a D. I don't know. Take your pick.
I'll go with the latter. Yes.
Okay.
All this is to say that I'm curious now what's going to happen with the WWE. Am I curious enough to watch it on a weekly basis again? Absolutely not. Will I be looking into some of the headlines and stories to see what's going to be going on moving forward? I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued what this can mean for a change for the product, a change for the storylines, a new direction for the company, and how that's all going to play out. And as far as the whole CM Punk thing, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful he'll re-emerge somewhere else. I don't know if he's going to be AEW or WWE. I would like to think he's going to have at least one more good run in his life, where he can go to a company, put together a storyline, maybe like a year or two's worth of storyline, and then just close it out from there.
Hopefully, and he better get moving, because I think he turned 45 this year, so he's running out of road.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know we've talked about, again, some of the older guys, Flair and Hogan, they'll still occasionally get into the ring, or they'll get involved in certain respects. I think Flair at this point has definitely walked away from it for as much as he can. Yeah.
Well, Flair had his Ric Flair's last match. I think that was summer, July of 2022. And that was originally it was supposed to be a singles match, and then when he realized he couldn't work a singles match, they put him in. It was him and his son-in-law Andrade versus Jeff Jarrett and Jay Lethal.
Yep.
And according to, I believe, Ric Flair admitted to losing consciousness twice during the match.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Okay, that's go back and watch that one. And I can't remember the last time Hogan was in the ring, which is actually a good thing. I couldn't
tell you either. Yeah, it's probably been at least 10 years. Because I know he did some dumb shit in TNA with Sting. In fact, yeah, I remember the two of us sitting around and talking, and talking about it in a previous iteration of the show, God, years ago at this point, when we said, yeah, it was probably like 2012, 2013. So I think I even said it's been 15 years since the 1997 Starrcade match between the two of them, and they're still on television having matches, and they were both long in the tooth at that point. So, and and Starrcade 97 is almost 26 years ago. So,
see, there was a point in wrestling, especially in WWE, where I kept saying, I can't wait for the new blood to show up. And I don't mean the faction. I mean the new I mean the newer crop of wrestlers to show up and to show us what they have. And there's a lot of them out there right now, especially on WWE television and on AEW. The newer guys are out there, and they're getting their experience, they're getting their exposure, they're getting their TV time. I'm just not into it anymore. And that's unfortunate, because I really, really was hoping to see all these guys do what they can do, live to their potential in these matches, or should I work to their potential in these matches, but start breaking away from some of these older guys who just don't know how to give it up, or don't know how to just call it quits. And I'm not saying that like Flair should have like stopped a long time ago. Flair, for the most part, I mean, he got out there, he did it. I mean, he was also another guy who had financial troubles. But it comes back to that same question that we've had before in the show. What do these guys do when they're done with the in-ring work? They can't get a job, not a normal job, it would drive them insane. If they can get some front office work, maybe. Like I was looking here before, so you've got Triple H and Shawn Michaels on the senior management team. Road Dogg is also part of the live events senior manager. There are ways to transition into other aspects of the business if you can keep your ego in check. But for guys like Flair and Hogan, different animals, different times, they got to do what they can to survive at this point, because in ring or appearances, those are going to start becoming far and few between, and after a while, that's it. What else do they have to show for at that point? So
exactly. You better, it's not just how much money you make; it's how much money you save as well.
That's right.
And but yeah, that's always been one of the tricks in the entire thing. And you can still make a certain amount of money. All you have to do is make appearances, go out to events, glad hand, sign your autograph, take the pictures. It's not hard, especially in this day and age when action figures are as popular as they are. I know people who like absolutely just go sideways to go out and get their figures signed. So, I mean, and actually, this is a nice segue. This past Saturday, I went to a wrestling show.
Ooh, really?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of the LVAC?
Does not ring a bell.
All right. LVAC, it stands for Lehigh Valley Athletic Council. It's a organization around here. They run usually a handful of shows per year. They usually do maybe 4 to 5 wrestling shows. They'll do like 1 or 2 in the spring, 2 or 3 in the summer, 1 in the fall, 1 in the winter, somewhere thereabouts. It's basically like a very well put together independent promotion, but there's not really like big overwhelming storylines or anything like that. In fact, they just started doing their first story, like some of their first major storylines this year. Some of the notables who have passed through there is Ultramantis Black, who was of Chikara fame. He's there a bunch.
Okay.
Orange Cassidy used to work there regularly before he got his TNA or his AEW deal. He still does make appearances on occasion. Willow Nightingale was a mainstay there. They've used Butcher and Blade, who are now also AEW regulars. But it's one of those ones where they have a lot of people passing through. It's usually like a good way station for like a lot of well-to-do indie talent, especially given the fact that the Lehigh Valley is not too far away from like New York, New Jersey, Philly, which are all hotbeds of independent wrestling.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was an interesting show. It was at the Steel Stacks in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, which is the complex that was built in the shadow of the remains of Bethlehem Steel and the giant foundries that used to make all the steel way back when. And it was a pretty good show. There was some 8-man matches, there was some 6-man matches, a couple tags, 2 women's matches. Their entire big marquee thing was they They have an evil heel manager, Sidney Bakabella, who his shtick is he's like an old timey wrestling manager. In fact, yeah, one of his catchphrases is he was in the WWF Hall of Fame. Junior put me in, or senior put me in, and junior threw me out. Yeah, going up against a team put together by his former protege, Big Dan Champion, who his entire gimmick is he yells Big Dan at people. It's a lot of fun. So they were good shows. It was nothing like mind blowing. It was good fun, solid indie wrestling. You got to see like a lot of guys who are kind of like on the up and coming on the independents. Like you've got Max the Impaler, the non-binary nightmare. Speedball Mike Bailey was on the show. There was a couple of that between like some like old timers and stuff like that too. Also, interestingly enough, they're signing autographs. In addition, Wheeler Yuta was supposed to work the show, but he got hurt, so they just had him there like doing autographs and pictures and stuff like that. But there was also a fan fest event not too far from there that day. So in addition to Wheeler Yuta, they also had appearances from Smoke Train Charles Wright, a.k.a. The Godfather, a.k.a. Kama Mustafa, a.k.a. Papa Shango.
Yeah.
D'Lo Brown, and Ron Simmons.
Nice.
Yeah, so effectively at that point, you had 3/5 of the Nation of Domination.
Okay.
Yeah, so they had them there hanging out, doing autographs, and yeah, it was kind of neat seeing like these like a guy like someone like Ron Simmons who you could tell he's in his 60s now, and you could tell his body's a little rough, but man, he still looks like he could kick the shit out of somebody without even trying too hard.
Yeah, man, he still got that frame.
Yeah. But no, it was a pretty cool time. It was a good show. I'm not a fan of the new things. I've seen some independents do where if you want a chair, you have to pay a little extra, and your basic ticket is just standing room only.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that.
That's kind of cheesy.
Nah.
Okay.
Now standing around for 3.5 hours on concrete is not fun.
No, I can imagine not. Even if you're going out like for like a bathroom break or a smoke break, you're still just standing around.
Yeah, it was a little much, but overall it was a good show. It was a lot of fun. It was a nice mixture of stuff. So, yeah, it was a damn good time.
All right. Well,
yeah,
I can tell by that yawn that you're getting a little tired. And I think
sorry, yeah, I'm the last of the meds I'm on are still kicking my ass a little bit, so I'm sorry, Pada.
No. Don't worry about that. That just tells me that we have reached the end of the night, and I think we've done a pretty good show so far. How do you feel?
I was going to say we're up around an hour 20, so I think we put in a good shift for the day.
All right. With that said, if you made it this far, thank you for listening. My name is Eric Hernandez.
I'm Doug,
and we are the Rabblecast.